Hey, I'm Rachel,
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
powered by DoorDash. Welcome to another episode of the Beyond a Ballot podcast. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Rachel.
We have one of our most favorite Americans on the show today.
We
We
do.
have Mosh from Mo News, who many of our followers know and follow. And I keep telling him I can't see him on Instagram anymore because of Bill C-18. And I miss him so much. So I'm excited to have him on.
He's always so brilliant, and
He's so brilliant.
he's so insightful, has his pulse on what's happening. When we tried kind of like debating on how do we talk about U.S. politics right now?
Yes, exactly.
Which feels like, you know, it's obviously a tense conversation. It's a challenging conversation. We didn't want to have anyone from one side without the other. And it really it really feels quite polarized right now. We wanted to find somebody who could give us kind of like a neutral position, a straight up conversation on really a troubling situation. So we knew who to call.
Yeah. And the thing about Mosh is that he lives in New York City. He is a content creator. He is a news creator. And so we knew that he would have his finger on the pulse for more of like the cultural impact of all of these things that are happening in the United States, whether or not it's Donald Trump or Charlie Kirk, or we might even ask him about Tylenol. And how that's playing out in the US and globally. And so we're really excited to dive in. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. We'll be right back with Mosh from Mo News. Mosh is the founder of Mo News, a leading independent news platform with millions of daily followers. A former executive producer at CBS Evening News and Fox News, he built Mo News to deliver fact-based, accessible updates on politics and current events. Mosh is recognized for breaking down complex issues in a way that informs and empowers diverse audiences. He is a great friend of the Beyond a Ballot podcast and is the one who translates American culture for all of us up here in Canada.
I was going to say it's good to be back, Rachel, but I wish Rachel and Amanda, I was here under better circumstances besides translating what the last few weeks in the U.S. have been like for the rest of you.
Yeah. What have the last few weeks in the U.S. been like? Because so many stories have come out, and we as Canadians are sitting up here north of the 49th parallel thinking, what's next? How are you guys feeling down there?
It's like the scene from Gladiator where he's like yelling at the crowd, like, "Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?"
Oh my God.
I feel like Russell Crowe. Like, what do you want, Canada? Like, are we?
Yeah, we are not entertained. We are a bit frazzled, to be honest.
Yeah, we're frazzled too, and I understand. Like, it's the same thing down here on the floor as it is up in the mezzanine where you guys are watching. A lot's going on. You know, I think that, there is sort of I was going to say like sort of the new normal of the Trump administration in terms of what's happening there. But I will say that what took place with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, genuinely concerns Americans, right? We have reached a stage here in the U.S. that we haven't seen the equivalent of since the 1960s. In terms of political assassinations. I mean, there was a period of time here in the U.S. Over the course of a decade where you saw JFK, RFK, MLK, Malcolm X, and then on top of that, George Wallace, the governor from Alabama, nearly killed, but assassination attempt. There were also, people forget this, like Gerald Ford was shot at twice in a matter of a couple of months. Whoa. Like we went through a phase in the 60s and 70s. Yeah, you actually look at American history. We've had, officially 47 presidents, though, 2 of them have served twice, right? Trump's 45 and 47. And in American history, nearly a quarter of them have either been shot, or killed. So that's the context, not that that makes you feel better, of American politics, is that we've gone through various violent phases, going back to the beginning of the Republic. What's concerning today in terms of what we saw with Charlie Kirk is that's probably the most prominent political assassination that we've seen going back the last time you saw that was probably when Reagan was shot in the chest and nearly killed. Just a couple of months into his presidency. But even that was like a guy who was like trying to impress a celeb crush, right? Like it wasn't like a political angle. He was trying to impress Jodie Foster, if I recall correctly.
Wow.
The guy who took aim at Ronald Reagan.
Oh my God.
So in terms of like pure politics here, you got to go back to the 60s and 70s in terms of what you've seen unfold here. And unfortunately, we've reached a stage here in America that there's a lot of people who feel like their voices are no longer heard. Our politics are broken. And so especially, you could go back to Luigi Mangione last year and the killing of the insurance executive in New York, or the not one but two assassination attempts on Donald Trump last year. But there almost every single one, except for one of the Trump assassination attempts, was a man in his early 20s with an sort of unclear political ideology. We can dive into that. But sort of the nihilistic, the world sucks, power sucks, everybody sucks mentality. And that includes, as we record this, we're just 48 hours off of the sniper in Texas who was taking aim at an immigration facility down here. So I think there's a lot of people across the spectrum who are generally concerned that it turns out that having very extreme rhetoric in this country and more guns than people and a lack of mental health facilities, put it all in a blender, and that's America in 2025.
Let's for those who
to begin. I wanted to begin optimistic and really like hopeful.
It's okay. This is the reality we're in right now. But for a lot of Canadians didn't know who Charlie Kirk was, which is hard to believe now because I think his name is the most searched name. I don't know that there's a lot of people who don't know today, but can you describe for our listeners, like, what prior to his assassination, how was Charlie Kirk known? Political activist, youth mobilizer, some names worse than that. Can you kind of share?
It depends on your politics, right? I will say this. Charlie Kirk was only 31 years old. And he actually, interestingly, we missed each other by a decade, but we grew up about a couple miles away from each other outside Chicago.
Oh, really?
In the suburbs of Chicago. Wow. He went to a neighboring high school, it turns out. So it sort of resonated with me on multiple levels, including, oh my God, we grew up in the same area with, at least similar interests when it came to politics and news. And Charlie Kirk, if you are of a certain age, and that age is under the age of 30 in America, you knew him much better than your parents did.
Okay.
And that's one of the interesting things about the impact of the assassination. Like a lot of people over 30, especially over 40, unless you were really heavily involved in politics, you might not have known Charlie Kirk, but your kids did, younger people did. He was very big online, had several million followers on various social media platforms. And he was a, to use one of the terms you used there, Amanda, a youth mobilizer. Like he, starting at 18, started this organization that has become extremely large called Turning Point USA. And he made a point of questioning what has been sort of the assumed reality for a couple decades, is that young people are liberal. Young people are owned by the Democrats in America. And he said, I'm not taking that for granted. I am going to fight the good fight among young people. So between his social media strategy, his podcasting strategy, and, just constant travel to college campuses, he would engage young people in discussions. And he comes at it from a very conservative, very Christian viewpoint, and said, let's have conversations about these topics. Let me explain the conservative point of view here. I am not going to just ascribe to the conventional wisdom that liberals get to win every college campus and win every argument. And in particular, one of his focuses was young men.
Right.
And you have now seen what you saw, especially in this past election in the U.S., where Donald Trump made a huge surge in Gen Z, but particularly among young Gen Z men, was that they have felt left behind. That all the programs, all the rhetoric about diversity, about focuses the past 20 years has been about young women and various minority groups. What about all the young white men that have been left behind? So he resonated with a lot of them. And it's one of the reasons why over the course of the past decade, you've seen this move, especially among young white men in the US, but then in the most recent election, young Latino men, young Black men, but just Gen Z men who are like, what about us? What about us? And Charlie's like, I'm here listening to all of you. And, one of the things he would do on these college campuses, he'd make all these viral videos where he would set up a tent,
right,
including what he did, sadly on his last day over in Utah Valley University. And he'd say, ask me any question. I will debate you. And it would challenge, people who would come in either agreeing with him, but some people would come in like well-researched, ready to fight with him and ask him questions. And he would engage with them regardless of their viewpoint. And some of those exchanges, not surprisingly, went very viral. And it's one of the reasons why a lot of young people were familiar with his content, because the content did very well on TikTok and Instagram. And, beyond sort of the campus strategy, he set up these annual conventions, and they kept growing and growing and growing. And it became one of the go-to events if you're a conservative leader and you were looking to resonate with young people and have a future. You had, in recent years, to make a stop at the Turning Point USA conference. And so, everyone from Donald Trump on down would attend this conference. And Charlie Kirk was in, the cell phones of all major leaders. He made a bet very early on a guy named J.D. Vance. When J.D. Vance was considering politics, he was still an author, an author of his best-selling book there about 10 years ago. And J.D. is like, I'm going to run for Senate. Anyway, fast forward, one of the key people who made the case to Donald Trump about J.D. Vance was Charlie Kirk.
Wow. Really? I didn't know that.
Charlie was very close to Donald Trump Jr. And Don Trump, and he said to Donald Trump Jr., you got to meet this guy, J.D., out of Ohio. Wow. I think he's, the future of the MAGA movement here. So Charlie Kirk, would do some stuff in front of the camera, but a lot of his work was behind the scenes.
Yeah, and that was what I wanted to dive in and ask you, because we can't really understand this connection with the political realm. Like, I don't think there's an equivalent in Canada of a commentator or a youth leader that has had such an impact on an administration. And so we're sitting up here watching, J.D. Vance fly Charlie Kirk's body back to Arizona on Air Force Two. Yeah. We're seeing the president at his funeral giving this speech and hugging Erica, his wife. Can you talk to us about the context of this relationship and the greater context of it in the United States? Is this typical? Like, have we seen this before?
I mean, listen, I think that there have been throughout American history prominent political activists that have had the ear of a president, right? So you can go back to the 19th century, like one name that comes to mind immediately is Frederick Douglass. Former slave who was free, who was a key advisor to Abraham Lincoln as the Civil War unfolded. We can fast forward, kind of staying in the civil rights realm. Martin Luther King going to JFK, right, to LBJ in the 1960s. Again, sort of civil rights activists. But you've had outsiders that have had the ear of the president. In some cases, they might be big donors. In some cases, they were the richest people in America. Elon Musk, a recent example of Donald Trump, but we could go back more than 100 years and talk about J.P. Morgan, like the original J.P. Morgan.
Oh, interesting.
He was, if not the richest, one of the richest men in America. And that was a time in U.S. history where we didn't have a Federal Reserve Bank. We had killed it for like 100 years till we bring it back in the 1920s or the early teens. And so, like, literally when the U.S. economy would go south, they would like call up J.P. Morgan. They're like, hey, bro, like, can you bail us out? Like,
that reminds me of the movie Annie, where they call Daddy Warbucks. So real life.
Similar time period. I haven't gone deep into it. Daddy Warbucks might be partially based on
totally
JP Morgan.
Yeah.
And so, I think that, you could go back over time. Ronald Reagan certainly had a lot of influential outsiders that would advise him on various things. In some cases, they're religious leaders. In some cases, they have, huge followings that are key when elections come up, because these activist folks outside can activate people, right? They can get people to the polls. And Charlie Kirk was, in the most recent election, one of the key people in like getting buses together to get people out to vote. So he served a key role there. He also had his finger on the pulse of the, so-called MAGA, Make America Great Again movement. and I, sort of up there with Trump, just sort of like feeling what people are thinking on various subjects, whether it's domestic policy or foreign policy. Now, Trump is accessible in a way that previous presidents have not been. Like, I have friends who are reporters who have Trump's cell phone number.
Wow.
I do not. And they're like, usually between like 11:30 p.m. and 1:15 a.m. is like usually the time to call Trump where he answers his phone.
Oh my God. That's crazy.
Like, and typically you have to go through a White House line, got to go to the chief of staff, like they don't just want the president talking to anybody, but Trump rolls differently.
Well, here
right,
in Canada, for
media.
context, there's been stories that Mark Carney, our prime minister, and Trump actually text each other late at night. Yeah.
Trump texts a lot of people. Actually, one of the most interesting stories that's come out recently, if you've been watching Trump's evolution on Ukraine, and like as he's increasingly become anti-Putin, and sort of like, this week at the UN, he's like, I think Ukraine can take back all of the land. I'm like,
oh my gosh.
Who is this guy? One of the key people who have gotten to Trump's ear or text messages is the president of Finland.
Wow.
I don't know if you've been following him. He actually went to college in the U.S., played golf, wanted to be a professional golfer on the PGA, and went to school in South Carolina. Did not become a professional golfer, went back to Finland, went into politics, is now the president of Finland. But like Trump and him like have like really gelled on golf. Like they love talking about golf.
This is wild.
And so like Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina who's close to Trump, set them up recently. He's like, Trump, I think one of the world leaders you're really going to like is the president of Finland. And they got together and like they text each other. And the way that the hours work between Helsinki and DC is the president of Finland wakes up super early because he's training for a triathlon. And the Wall Street Journal had a great story about this. And he will like call or text Trump, and it's like 1 a.m. in DC. Trump's still awake because like Trump doesn't go to bed till 2. And they'll like have all these exchanges, and he somehow, through a conversation about both golf and politics, has like gotten through to Trump about like who the true Vladimir Putin is.
This is text message diplomacy. It's crazy.
And what's crazy is I was a Fox News reporter when Obama first came in, and he was like addicted to his BlackBerry, and it was a whole controversy about like what he could do with his BlackBerry because it's like it's not secure, and like God knows how secure Trump's device is these days, and whether it's hacked, and is everyone reading the messages?
Oh my God!
I mean, I just remember when it was controversial for these sort of things to happen, and now between, if you followed earlier this year, Signalgate, all the U.S. officials using Signal, which is secure but not really secure. And this is sort of where we're at right now when it comes to international diplomacy, and specifically engaging with the U.S. president.
Okay, let's talk about fallout, because so Charlie Kirk's assassination, and the world was watching. And then as they apprehended his assassin or alleged assassin.
Yeah. Depending on which podcast you listen to, it's very alleged assassin.
Could be if you're listening to Candace Owens these days.
Well, she's going to find the real killer, she said. But only if you
never know.
You buy her merch.
Totally.
She needs the money to. Yeah.
Oh my God.
But immediately you felt this. It was visceral. This divide. This like, what party was he from? What party was his family affiliated with? Is it far left extremists? Is it the far right movement? And you could, in Canada, and I'm sure you feel it in the US, but here it just felt like a gulf between these two sides, just pitted at one another.
Yeah.
And then so many things have happened since then. But talk to us a little bit about, is the left and the right, these constructs, is it real? Is there any way to bridge those gaps? Is it so far gone at this point?
So one thing to keep in mind, and we've been talking to folks about this over at Mo News the past couple of weeks, is that while like it's satisfying for folks to immediately try to figure out the politics of the person through sort of a traditional prism, that increasingly what we're seeing among these like young, disenchanted men is sort of like a nihilistic, the world all sucks approach. That was one of the things that struck a bunch of folks and was confusing to us initially when the first Trump assassination attempt happens in Butler, Pennsylvania last July. And the FBI starts releasing what this guy, Matthew Crooks, was searching for. In the lead up to the assassination attempt, he was Googling Biden's schedule and Trump's schedule. Like it was not clear based on his Google searches that he had like particular unique resentment for Donald Trump. It was more of like I need to get at the powers that be. The system sucks. I need to make a statement, right? And you have seen that in multiple ways, whether, we could fast forward to the Charlie Kirk alleged killer, and you look at his, what's been released so far, right? A lot of it was like memes. He was in like video game culture, a lot of stuff meant to be like ironic. And, while certainly based on his family's viewpoints, it appears he had gotten increasingly left since he went to college, it's not clear cut in terms of viewpoints. And I think that, there is this tendency in the U.S. to be like, oh, that wasn't on my team. That was your team.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
Like the bad side, the bad thing that was done by your team.
Yeah.
Yes.
No way it was done by my team. Whereas not so long ago, and I imagine this might be true in other countries today, but in the U.S. not so long ago, we used to mourn as a country. Like, this is a terrible thing that happened.
Yeah.
Like, why does that person's personal politics, even if they have certain personal politics, it's not reflective of everyone with that viewpoint. But we saw in the hours in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk, before we knew anything, when the guy was still on the loose, you already saw President Trump, among other folks, say, the far left did this. You're to blame for this. Your side's to blame. And like, we don't know anything yet, right? It's like I mentioned earlier, like the Reagan assassin, like wanted to impress an actress.
Right.
Like Jodie Foster. Like, that was that person's goal. So like, if you're crazy enough and mentally ill to like say, I'm going to assassinate a world leader, like, you're probably not all together, right? It's not a coherent philosophy. But that's sort of where we're at. And so that's led to this whole discussion, J.D. Vance then, again, like we still sort of live in these crazy times where the vice president of the United States like filled in as the host for the Charlie Kirk show after his assassination.
Yeah.
And one of the things he went into was, well, there are crazies on both sides, but your crazies are way worse than our crazies. And your crazies are way more into violence than our crazies. And here's a poll, that shows that, right? There was a poll that showed that like more of very liberal people said violence was okay than more very conservative people in the YouGov poll that he cited. Then you look into research and it's hard, right? The data is hard because you're like literally trying to go through every single piece of violence in America, and we have a violent country, and like trying to, based on newspaper reports and various things, like try to categorize those people. When again, it's not always clear what their philosophy is, but we are seeing, right, that there was a lot of left-wing violence in the 60s and 70s, according to the researchers that researched this, and then sort of went to right-wing violence for a few decades. And these days, you still see violence on the right, but you've seen a surge in the past couple of years on the left. But what does it matter?
Exactly.
I think, but it does matter to some people because we live our entire lives in America these days, especially over the course of the last decade, through like, I wear a blue hat, I wear a red hat, which I know is different in Canada. You guys have we flipped our colors. But yeah, in America, like on the left you wear a blue hat, on the right you wear a red hat, and everything in the world is seen through those lenses.
I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the pop culture fallout, and specifically Jimmy Kimmel, because that was a huge story and there was a lot of debate over free speech. Many people thought Jimmy Kimmel was going to be off air forever. He ended up coming back and very emotionally giving this monologue upon his return about Charlie Kirk and how he was feeling. Can you talk to us about the greater impact of this on U.S. culture? What was that divide? What were people saying?
So, are you guys able to watch Jimmy Kimmel besides online in Canada? Is it
You're the only one
on one of the networks?
for us in Canada. Only Mo News. Yeah,
Mo News on Instagram
is the only one blocked. Yeah,
that? Can you just
We're
get
working
with
on
Meta
it.
and fix
We're working on it.
That legislation, that was such a failure. I mean, I get it. Like, it came from a good place, but like, let's just end that experiment. Meta won.
Oh gosh, don't even get us started.
So let's talk about where things stand. So in the U.S., late night television was like must-see TV for decades.
Right.
There were famous late night show hosts named Ed Sullivan. Like the famous, the Beatles coming to America was on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Yeah.
Elvis shaking his hips for the first time on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Wow.
There was a famous late night comedian named Johnny Carson. And then, for a long time, there was Jay Leno and David Letterman, sort of the heyday. Yeah. And, we've gotten to this stage, sort of like the rest of live television, where ratings have continued to go down through the years. And they don't get the views that they once did. Social media has become the new place to, get your comedy, or you might take in those shows via social media clips. But they still sort of, there is sort of a cultural meaning to these days. Stephen Colbert, at least until next May when his show is set to end, Jimmy Fallon on NBC, and Jimmy Kimmel on ABC, the three big networks in the US. Now, what is unique about the networks in the US is they're free over the air. Like if you still have like antenna, like you go get a digital antenna at an electronics store, you can still get a handful of channels in America without a cable or satellite package. Because they take part of the spectrum. I won't explain the technicals here, but effectively they get from the government a spectrum, ABC, NBC, and CBS, the three big networks here, as they have for a century. And that means that the government here has some regulatory control over what happens on those networks. Cable channels in the US, satellite channels, streaming channels, so everything from CNN to ESPN to Fox News to Netflix, no control. Like they can do whatever they want. That's why like HBO can do nudity, right? Like there's no control. NBC cannot do nudity because the government can manage that. So like the famous Super Bowl incident 20 plus years ago, Justin Timberlake and Janet Jackson, the Nipplegate or whatever you want to, they called it, the nip slip. Like there was a fine to CBS because that was a free over-the-air network. The government regulates that. Whereas like that happens like every 3 minutes on Showtime or HBO, and like the government can't do anything about it.
Wow.
And so, when we talk about FCC and like Trump's push, like he really has very limited control. Like he can't control what I do on my podcast or on YouTube or whatever. It's like, it is like a handful of networks in the US where the government still sort of has jurisdiction. And the way it works, with these like large companies, just to give the Canadian audience a background, right? ABC is owned by the Disney company, like of Disney World, right? And Disney cruise ships and Mickey Mouse. NBC is owned by a large network called Comcast, which is the largest cable provider in the US. CBS, well, there's gone through some ownership stuff, but is owned by Paramount. So these larger corporations that have business interests before the president and the federal government. And because of the way Trump manages things, he's like, what leverage points do I have on these companies? Can I like hurt Disney in some other way if like they don't take Jimmy Kimmel off the, he runs like, let's, I will quote Ted Cruz, Canadian born Ted Cruz.
It's true. Shout out to Ted Cruz, the
born
Canadian.
In Canada.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, but like somehow still like can legally be an American president, he thinks.
Yeah.
Anyway, we haven't crossed that bridge, but he in America, politicians also have their own podcasts, including Ted Cruz. And on his podcast, he said the FCC boss sounded like a mafia boss when he said, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, ABC. And so Jimmy Kimmel, getting back to him, gives a monologue where he, like alludes to the thought, and you saw this from the left, that the killer of Charlie Kirk might have actually been MAGA, might have been on the right, which is, like, let's be clear about that. There is no evidence to that. That is misinformation. But in America, with the First Amendment of the Constitution, free speech, you're actually that you can say that you can do bad information. Now, that doesn't prevent you from being punished by your bosses, which in this case was Disney and ABC. But only you can do that. So the FCC and Trump, one of the few places they can exert power are these networks, right? Jimmy Kimmel's on ABC. If Jimmy Kimmel said this on YouTube, nobody would care. Or nobody could do anything about it.
Right. And
they say, well, we could pull the license for ABC's ability, to be on the air. Like there are ramifications for what this is. They didn't do anything. They just made the threat. But we are in a culture in the US right now where they're taking the threats from the government seriously. And you have seen across the board, if you've been following the headlines, whether it's media organizations, law firms, universities, a variety of organizations, under just threat from the White House have acquiesced and made deals. Wow. And that's, been the first 6 or 7 months of the Trump presidency that is very much in stark contrast to the first Trump term when like the fight was on against Trump, where people this time are being very deferential to President Trump. So you saw Disney under that threat say, yeah, we're going to pull Jimmy off the air. But then they saw the backlash from the left. Yeah. And the backlash from the left, were people who are canceling their Disney Plus subscriptions and their Hulu subscriptions and trying to hurt Disney in its pocketbook. And so ultimately Disney's, Bob Iger runs Disney, was like, you know what, we're going to put it back on the air. And so he came back on the air and he said everything but sorry, right? Like the closest you can get to sorry without saying sorry. And now Trump has threatened, potential future action here. We'll see what it entails, but it's super interesting because like it comes at a time where these networks are, while there's this cultural resonance to these shows, are increasingly losing audience share. So it's sort of like the last vestige of these networks, and the little control the government still has over a few media entities out there is one of these networks. But for the most, I mean, it was also interesting to see Jimmy come back and the rest of the comedians come back and go super hard on President Trump. So this whole idea that like free speech is dead and being killed, like I don't buy that argument. Because, like, look, majority of Jimmy's monologue that night and the following nights were, like, going hard on President Trump. So, like, is it the end of free speech? No. What you saw was that, like, Disney flinched, like, blinked. And we have seen that from a few companies. But I wonder if the tide turned this week with Jimmy back on the air. It's something we're going to watch.
Do you think it has?
Whether Disney may have given other companies courage. You know what's interesting? I don't know. Like, I can't say for certain, but it does feel like the fact that they put him back on the air and they're ready to engage there is super interesting. And you have seen, Amanda, like in a number of the cases, the law has actually been behind the people who fight Donald Trump. These executive orders he's been doing against universities, against law firms, the handful of major U.S. law firms that fought the president all won their cases. It just turns out that the majority of law firms decided, we'll cut a deal with him. It's just easier that way. And the universities that have stood up to him, they've had judges rule in their favor so far, including Harvard. But for many universities who don't have the resources of Harvard, like they just cut a deal with him, right? Columbia did, Northwestern did, UVA did. And so will we reach a turning point here? I mean, I feel like yes. Like I feel like it's not going to happen in all cases, but I do think Disney like bringing him back on the air like is not insignificant.
It's interesting because the cancel culture argument was such a big MAGA argument, right? For the woke left. And it was
right. They're canceling us. They're blocking our right to free speech. Yes.
Totally. And then it became the heart of this argument over the last week with Jimmy Kimmel. So the irony or the hypocrisy of that was so stark. And were you surprised to see free speech at the center of this argument, like the First Amendment at the center of this argument, but on the reverse?
I mean, it's not the first time in politics in any country where like, wait, weren't you guys saying the opposite?
Yeah,
like
it's exhausting.
Last term, and we were saying the opposite. Like, I'm just trying to keep track here. Like, which side are we on this time? Because then you heard people on the right this time being like, it's not cancel culture, it's consequences. Like,
right.
Yeah, I sort of heard that from liberals during like, Me Too and Black Lives Matter. Like, well, it's not cancel culture, it's consequences for your actions and what you said. And so it was like a very difficult sort of, line to thread there, like where like you're trying to sort of create a distinction without a real difference. Listen, I think part of this is just revenge, right? Like Trump was kicked off of X and kicked off of Facebook and kicked off of Instagram after January 6th. Conservatives, and you've seen that in the algorithm, right? In what was revealed in the Twitter files, like that the algorithm was definitely against conservatives for a long time. And so now, conservatives are on the rise here in the US, and they feel like they're going to go after the institutions that, for the most part, have dominated them and they feel have blocked out their voices. And by the way, you look at actual data. Let's go to the late night shows. Jimmy Kimmel, Jimmy Fallon, and Stephen Colbert. There have been assessments done of their guests. 95% of their guests have been liberals over the course of the last 4 years. 95% of them in a country that is ostensibly 50-50. So the argument from conservatives, like this is where I think, Trump is very good at diagnosing issues. It's the execution of the solutions that, we can debate, right? But in terms of diagnosing an actual problem, like, yeah, the late night shows are overwhelmingly liberal, and they view the late night shows, Hollywood, the media, universities, law firms, all these major institutions, conservatives believe they are controlled by liberals, and they have been out to hurt conservatives for long enough, and it is now time to flip the script on all of them.
Okay, I'm going to pivot a little bit to another big story that's come out this week. Tylenol. And now word from our title sponsor, DoorDash. Season 3 of Beyond a Ballot is powered by DoorDash. Just like we go beyond politics, DoorDash goes beyond delivery, investing in people, stories, and communities across Canada. For many small businesses, growth means finding new ways to stand out and stay connected. In fact, nearly 2 in 3 merchants agree that DoorDash helps them establish a bigger presence in their community. For Lainey Stewart, owner of Sugar Mamas in Newfoundland, that presence begins with family. When her 2 oldest daughters became mothers, Lainey turned her passion for home baking into a retail bakery, creating a place where her daughters could work alongside her while supporting their young families. 14 years later, Sugar Mamas has become a hub where Lainey, her 3 daughters, and a close-knit team of women balance family and business one batch at a time, utilizing DoorDash to allow her business to reach new heights. Their story is a reminder of how women-led businesses across Canada are shaping our communities every day. Tylenol is the enemy.
I need a Tylenol after all that.
When did Tylenol become the enemy?
Tylenol is the enemy of pregnant women. What is the feeling in the U.S. around this story? Which, it bothers me because pregnant women are in such a vulnerable state in terms of like, are we making the right decision for our baby? And now to have a political leader, to have Donald Trump come out and support this with no medical backing. Like, just the ambiguity is going to really impact so many women around the world.
And it's one of the few things that your doctors are like, you can actually take this if you're, having issues when you're pregnant, right? Because for the most part, you're told not, most of the things you can't take while you're pregnant. The larger issue at play here in the U.S. is sort of one of the other things that COVID broke in the U.S. or got broken during COVID, which is a lack of trust in the public health system and public health communications. That like we are unique in America as opposed to the rest of the world where like COVID for the most part, and yeah, of course there are divides in Canada and a variety of places, but in the US, we were like things became politicized very quickly around COVID, around lockdowns, around vaccine mandates, and all of that. And there was a lot of miscommunication around what the vaccine would do. And some people still are under the impression that they heard from public health leaders that like the vaccine would prevent them from getting COVID or prevent them from spreading COVID. And that's why it was mandated. And then, the data came out eventually that like, it's sort of like, was the right communication line from some health leaders, which is like, no, it just means that like you're less likely to die from COVID and be hospitalized, but like you'll still get COVID, right? But like some people felt like they heard something completely different and felt like public health leaders had politics behind them as opposed to their wellness behind them. And it goes to like, initially we were told you didn't need masks and then you did need masks and, and then the standing 6 feet behind, one another, or a couple meters or whatever it was in every country, like that was, turns out totally arbitrary. So there has now, gotten to the point where in the U.S., if you're on the right, you don't trust science. You don't trust these public health leaders. And so rise Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has made a career of questioning the medical establishment and, pushing back against sort of, and you get this from some public health communication, that like to make things easy for people, we should just say this is bad and this is good. When we all know there are nuances and there are risks inherent in everything. And so Trump has elevated him to the most powerful position when it comes to health and medicine in this country. And Kennedy has a reputation for sort of speaking with his gut and not with like actual like data and research. In a position where he oversees the most important medical institutions in the United States, and you could argue globally some of the most influential and important ones, whether the American CDC and FDA and NIH, the amount that the U.S. invests in medicine and research that has a global impact. And so one of the major causes RFK Jr. has had for years is getting to the bottom of autism and linking things to autism. And for years, he would link vaccines to autism, and there is no study that has shown actual causation of vaccines leading to autism. So what's the backup to that? Because he couldn't go like that would have caused like that would have been next level if he went there. let's go with the Tylenol thing. Like, it's not as controversial as the vaccine thing. And
Oh
while
my
there have been a huge number of studies that have shown no linkage there was this Harvard study of studies that was done this summer. It was a study of 46 studies. And of those 46 studies, they found an association between Tylenol use and autism. But for those at home, association is not causation, right? It's association. For example, all three of us in the summer eat more ice cream, right? And that includes most people.
Definitely.
Also in the summer, we tend to see more killings in America. That does not mean that eating ice cream and the more of us eating ice cream is leading to more of us killing each other. At least there's no evidence of that, right? And so my point is, like, sure, do you see an association? Yeah. Do doctors already have said, like, if you can avoid Tylenol, but if your fever gets too high, that's not good for your fetus either. Like, take it. And so they decided to go there. And unfortunately, Trump and RFK Jr. are not the best communicators on these things. And so could they explain that with nuance? Yes. Did anything change this week? No. The same, you're going to still get the same advice you were going to get previously from your doctor about Tylenol, but it's become super politicized. And like within days, you saw Barack Obama on the other side, criticize Trump for it. And now suddenly Tylenol has become political in America, as of September 2025.
Yeah, because it doesn't feel like nothing changed. It feels like everything changes overnight.
Yeah.
Like, the stock goes down and people become concerned, and women, and it feels like an attack on women. Like, oh, here's another thing we did wrong. And did we take a Tylenol? And, parents of kids with autism, these awful stories that are popping up online where they're like, my kid asked me, did you take Tylenol when you were pregnant? It's like a lot of things happen when he says the crazy things that he says.
It has a real life impact.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of families out there who are like, yeah, I actually want to be like, I would love for us to get to the bottom of this, right? But you're not approaching it in a research-based way, in a sort of informed data-based way. And that's only going to, as the right and RFK Jr. have said, we're here to fix the lack of trust in public health. Actually, the way you guys have been approaching it now, it can be argued that you've now only made it worse, and the other side now doesn't trust the public health system.
Exactly. So we have 2 more questions for you.
Got it.
The first one is, so a lot of things came out of the last week. It's an attack on democracy. It's an attack on women's health. It's an attack on health. And I think Canadians want to know, is the U.S. okay? Is it going to be okay? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but you cover this. What is your sense?
I think we're eventually going to be okay. I don't know if short term we're going to be like, I don't see the tide turning tomorrow, today, next week, next month. We are in a situation in the U.S. where everything is seen through a political lens, and even things that should not be political. We're also in a situation where all politics has become nationalized. We're a huge country. We're 350 million people, right? We're like 10x Canada. There used to be a robust local news infrastructure. I sort of come back to the media side of this just because that's where I live. And you used to like have a good local paper and it'll tell you about the issues, because ultimately most issues in the US can be solved and dealt with on a local or state level. But you've seen, with the economics of the media business going the way they do, that everything's become nationalized. So like you don't get much in the way of local news. All you get is like what's happening in Washington every day. So everything is seen through Washington. Everything is seen through the president. The president here in the US talks like 10 times a day, right? And comments on everything. And so everything is sort of seen through him. Like whether it's like Taylor Swift's engagement or Tylenol, or like literally it's like, what did Trump say about that today? What did Trump say about this today? He goes to all the sports events, etc. And he is very much a guy who wants to be at the center of everything that is happening. But that also means that like everything that goes on is being seen through, a political lens, and your feelings about the president, good or bad, then dictate how you react to all those things. So I don't know that like we can fix the situation we're in the US in that environment, in the environment where like anything that goes bad is the other side's fault. And you you have also a team in place there at the White House that very much believes that the government was dysfunctional, and the solution to that is to like gut major parts of the government. And well, how is that going to turn out? What are the long-term impacts and damage that is done there? And I'm here to say that we've been through worse periods of time in the U.S. I mean, we had a civil war in the last 5 years. I mean,
we're worrying about that for you.
Yeah, we're worried about it too. Well, I mean, and I'm not here to say like it'll happen tomorrow, it'll happen next year, but like you can see where unless you get some leaders on both sides that are willing to like hold hands, like that was sort of my dream out of Charlie Kirk, was like, can we all take a moment? Like, can we have Democrats come to the White House and just say, everyone, like, let's cool it right now? But that's not where we went, right? We went for like, you suck, it's your fault. And like things felt worse after that, even though like there was an opportunity there. And unfortunately, if you look through history, things have to get very bad for like a realization to happen that like this path isn't going to work for us. And unfortunately, again, going back to those assassination attempts, whether it's insurance executives, whether it's Charlie Kirk, whether it's ICE, there's a feeling out there that the system is broken, because it is, and that violence is the only way to get attention for your cause. And so we're living in that era right now. And unfortunately, I don't see, at least today when I'm talking to you, Amanda, it ending. But we are the world's oldest modern democracy. We turn 250 years old next year. And so I think there's a lot of us that hope, but I have this feeling that there's gonna, unfortunately, be a couple more years of this, especially given that, like, listen, we have political leaders in place, in particular our president, that is very divisive, right? And doesn't really do the kumbaya thing. He does the it's your fault thing. So I'm not here to solely...
I hate my opponent's thing.
Right. Like at Charlie Kirk's funeral, like the widow is like, I forgive the killer of my husband.
Right.
And Trump's like, BT dubs, like, I totally disagree with you on that. I hate my enemies and want them to die. He's president for 3.5 more years. I'm not saying he's the only like issue in America, but I'm just saying that rhetoric from the most prominent individual in the country, who effectively controls the bully pulpit and the microphone in the country, I don't see things turning around in the short term.
Okay, I'm gonna leave it right there. Mosh, that was some doom and gloom at the end of this podcast.
Hope springs eternal, Amanda. We'll be okay. We've been through worse here, but like it's gonna be rough going for a little bit here in the U.S. You guys enjoy. You guys try your best to just sort of take it in across the border and know that like, we'll figure it out. We just we're going through some growing pains here in the U.S.
going through some tough times.
Yeah.
We can't thank you enough. You are like a wealth of insight. It's so interesting to talk to you. I feel like we could talk to you for hours and hours. And we know how in demand you are. So we really appreciate that you've given us some time up here to share your thoughts. And we hope you'll come back.
I only in better times, like when things like are really going great in America. You're
the
like,
other side of the midterms, maybe.
Yeah, you're just like, Mosh, like things are amazing. Like, what is happening? How did you guys turn it around so quickly?
You made America great again.
Next time I'll be here to report that.
Thanks for being here. We'll be right back.
Thank you for listening. New episodes air every Friday.
Subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on Instagram and find us at beyondaballot.com.